Did secret whispers echo behind castle walls? Were hearts truly tangled in forbidden affection during the medieval era? Number 1. The labyrinthine pleasure garden. Pleasure garden of the medieval period, often a grand and sprawling affair, unfolded itself in layers of careful design, a living tapestry woven with purpose and beauty. These gardens, far from being mere patches of greenery, served as extensions of the noble dwelling places, where leisure and refined activity took precedence. They were designed not just for casual strolls, but for the full engagement of the senses, a world apart from the harsh realities beyond their walls. The very layout of such a garden often suggested a journey, a winding path leading to hidden delights and indeed hidden moments. Within these expansive pleasure gardens, one could find a deliberate crafting of space that lent itself perfectly to the unfolding of discrete narratives. The design elements were not haphazard. They were informed by centuries of horticultural knowledge and aesthetic sensibilities. Trellises, heavy with the weight of climbing roses, honeysuckle, or ivy, formed verdant walls that could both guide and obscure. These living partitions created intimate alcoves, soft green chambers where hushed conversation might pass unnoticed by someone just a few paces away. The scent of roses, particularly the ancient varieties like the damask or gallica, hung heavy in the air, a natural perfume that could also mask the subtle tension of a close encounter. The thorns, though often overlooked, added a layer of protective wildness, a reminder of the garden's deeper, sometimes untamed heart. Fountains, central features in many pleasure gardens, contributed to the overall atmosphere in a profound way. The rhythmic sound of water, whether a gentle trickle, a steady gurgle, or the playful splash of a jet, possessed an inherent ability to soothe and to conceal. Conversation held near a flowing fountain would be naturally muffled, the constant murmur of the water acting as a delicate veil over spoken words. These fountains were not always simple affairs. Some were elaborate sculpted masterpieces, featuring mythical creatures or allegorical figures, providing visual interest and also convenient points for a brief, seemingly casual stop. A hand might brush another's, as they both admired the artistry of a griffin spouting water, a brief electrifying touch that could signal so much more than polite appreciation. The cool mist from the water, particularly on a warm day, added another layer of sensory experience, a refreshing counterpoint to the heat of a burgeoning emotion. Records from the gardens of Islandry, though later Renaissance, show the continuation of such design principles, where water features were integral to both beauty and acoustic privacy. Arbors, formed by intertwining branches and trailing vines over a supporting framework, offered perfect, secluded havens. These were often more substantial than simple trellises, creating tunnel-like passages or intimate circular rooms entirely enveloped by greenery. The dappled sunlight filtering through the leaves created shifting patterns of light and shadow on the ground, adding to the sense of enchantment and concealment. A medieval manuscript known as the Tequinum Sanitatis, a medical treatise from the 14th century, often depicted such arbors as places of rest and contemplation. Quick meeting, a shared glance, a secret note passed from hand to hand could all occur within the leafy embrace of an arbor, the outside world momentarily forgotten. The rustle of leaves as one entered or exited the arbor could serve as a natural warning, providing a moment to compose oneself before rejoining the more public areas of the garden. Beyond the structured beauty, pleasure gardens often contain elements designed for playful interaction, which could also be repurposed for private rendezvous. Chessboard lawns, laid out with alternating squares of different colored plants or gravel, invited leisurely games. Pause in the game, perhaps, to study the board, could provide an opportunity for a meaningful look or a whispered aside, the strategic complexities of the game providing a perfect cover. A small pavilion, open-sided yet roofed, offered shelter from the sun or a sudden shower, and also a more private space for a prolonged conversation. Such pavilions, often adorned with painted panels or carved supports, were often strategically placed to offer specific views of the garden, drawing the eye away from those within. The Roman de la Rose, a foundational allegorical poem of the 13th century, describes the Garden of Deduit, or pleasure, in exquisite detail, featuring arbors, fountains, and secluded spaces, ill-equating the ideal setting for romantic pursuits, albeit allegorical ones. The sheer size of many medieval pleasure gardens also contributed to their utility as sites for secret meetings. With numerous paths winding through different thematic sections, it was possible for two individuals to arrange to meet in a specific, less frequented corner, seemingly by chance. A person might claim to be admiring a rare plant collection or seeking a specific medicinal herb in a designated area, when their true purpose was to meet a secret admirer. The meandering nature of the paths, sometimes bordered by tall hedges of boxwood or hornbeam, created a sense of isolation even when others were present in the wider garden. The hedges, meticulously trimmed, formed living walls that could block sight lines effectively. The subtle scent of cut foliage, mingling with the perfume of flowers, created a unique sensory signature for each hidden corner. Furthermore, these gardens often featured small ornamental structures, like grottoes or artificial mounds, which added to their charm and their potential for secrecy. Grottoes, often partially submerged or built into a hillside, provided cool, damp, and naturally secluded spaces. Their dark interiors, contrasting with the bright light of the garden, offered a dramatic backdrop for a clandestine encounter. The sound of dripping water within a grotto would further enhance the acoustic privacy. Artificial mounds, sometimes topped with a small tree or a bench, provided a vantage point over the garden, allowing one to discreetly observe the movements of others, while also offering a sense of elevated seclusion. A shared view from such a mount, a quiet moment, high above the manicured beds, could forge a unique bond. The concept of a mount in a garden is seen in medieval illustrations and later in Renaissance gardens, showing a continuous tradition of shaping the landscape for aesthetic and practical purposes, including privacy. Types of plants cultivated within the pleasure garden also played a role. Beyond the beautiful roses and fragrant lilies, more utilitarian plants were often included, but their presence could also be exploited. A patch of tall lavender or rosemary, grown for its scent or medicinal properties, could provide a momentary screen. The buzzing of bees drawn to these fragrant herbs would add to the natural soundscape, masking any hushed words. The very act of collecting herbs could be a plausible excuse for lingering in a secluded part of the garden away from the watchful eyes of others. The inclusion of fruit trees, often arranged in neat rows or espaliered against walls, also offered possibilities. A shared apple, plucked fresh from a branch, or a moment spent beneath the shade of a blossoming cherry tree, could transform an innocent act into a moment charged with unspoken meaning. The ephemeral beauty of cherry blossoms falling like snow could symbolize the fleeting nature of such secret moments. The very concept of a medieval pleasure garden was rooted in the idea of an idealized, almost Edenic space, separated from the wildness of nature and the cares of the world. This deliberate separation, reinforced by high walls and gated entrances, created a sanctuary. Within this sanctuary, the rules of society might feel a little looser, the boundaries of propriety a little more permeable. The beauty and tranquility of the setting could lull one into a sense of security, making it easier to let down one's guard. A gentle breeze, carrying the scent of jasmine and honeysuckle, the soft chirping of birds, the dappled light of the afternoon sun, filtering through leaves. All these elements conspired to create an atmosphere ripe for the blossoming of quiet affections. The garden itself became a confidant, a silent witness to stolen glances and whispered promises, This tradition of the garden, as a setting for love, can be traced back to classical antiquity and continued through the Middle Ages, as evidenced by literary works and the surviving descriptions of noble estates. A truly captivating space, the medieval pleasure garden held untold stories within its verdant embrace. Number 2. The elevated mount garden. The mount garden, a distinctive feature in some grand medieval estates, offered a unique blend of commanding views and subtle seclusion, making it an intriguing setting for discreet encounters. These mounts were not natural hills, but rather artificial constructions, carefully shaped and often fortified. Mounds of earth designed to elevate a portion of the garden above the surrounding landscape. Their creation was a significant undertaking, requiring considerable labor and planning, underscoring their importance within the overall garden design. The very act of ascending the mount was a deliberate one, a transition from the lower, flatter garden beds to a new perspective. From the summit of a mount, one could survey the entire expanse of the pleasure garden, the castle beyond, and sometimes the distant countryside. This elevated position offered a sense of mastery and overview. However, this same elevation also provided a unique form of privacy. While one could see out the angles of approach, and the clever planting on the slopes of the mount made it difficult for those below to clearly see those at the top. The slopes themselves were often planted with dense shrubbery, small trees, or trailing vines, creating a natural screen that obscured the view from ground level. A visitor approaching the base of the mount might only catch glimpses of figures through the foliage, their identities or actions remaining largely indistinct. The trellises, sure as du Duc de Berry, a celebrated illuminated manuscript from the early 15th century, depicts various garden scenes, some of which feature elevated structures or mounts, puting their presence in the aristocratic landscapes of the time. Access to the mount was typically by winding paths or spiraling ramps, often paved with stone or gravel. These paths were rarely straight, but rather curved and circuitous, adding to the sense of a journey and providing opportunities for fleeting moments of privacy. A couple might ascend the mount together, their steps falling into a synchronized rhythm, their hands perhaps brushing as they navigated a narrow turn. The path itself could act as a barrier, with tall plantings on either side creating a corridor that blocked external sight lines. The deliberate slowness of the ascent allowed for conversation to deepen, for unspoken thoughts to manifest in shared glances. Away from the hurried pace of the main garden, crunch of gravel underfoot, a distinctive sound could also serve as an auditory signal of someone approaching, allowing for a swift adjustment of demeanor or a strategic separation. At the summit of the mount, a flat, often circular platform provided a small, intimate space. This area might feature a single prominent tree, perhaps an ancient oak or a graceful linden offering shade and a natural focal point. A stone bench, often built into the base of the tree or placed strategically to overlook a particular view, would invite repose. This singular bench could become a clandestine meeting point, a place where hushed conversations could unfold against the backdrop of a panoramic vista. The open expanse of the sky, above the distant sounds of the castle life, all contributed to an atmosphere both grand and intensely personal. Cool stone of the bench, a stark contrast to the warmth of a hand, could become a subtle conduit for secret messages. Sometimes a small pavilion or folly was constructed at the top of the mount, providing more substantial shelter and even greater privacy. These structures, often charmingly designed, with decorative elements like carved wood or painted murals, served as sheltered retreats. They might have open arches or windows offering framed views, but their enclosed nature still allowed for a significant degree of seclusion. The acoustics within such a small, semi-enclosed space could be surprisingly good for private conversations. The voices muffled by the structure itself and the surrounding foliage. A shared moment within the confines of such a pavilion, overlooking the world, would feel profoundly intimate. A shared secret between two people in the silent landscape below. Records from some grand estates indicate the construction of such garden follies designed for leisurely contemplation, and sometimes for the privacy they afforded, the strategic placement of the mount within the larger garden also played a role. It was often situated at a point that allowed for a clear view of specific garden features, a particularly beautiful parterre, a magnificent fountain, or a distant gate. This provided a natural excuse for visitors to ascend the mount, to admire the view. While seemingly engaged in appreciating the landscape, two individuals could exchange meaningful glances or brief words. Their true focus on each other, the distant figures moving about in the garden below, would appear small and indistinct, their presence serving as a backdrop rather than a direct threat to privacy. The sounds from below, perhaps the distant laughter of children or the murmur of other garden visitors, would be attenuated by the height becoming a soft, indistinct hum. The very nature of the mount, as an elevated feature, also contributed to a sense of being set apart, almost an escape from the everyday. This physical separation could translate into a psychological one, making it easier for individuals to shed inhibitions and speak more freely. The fresh air at the summit, the subtle shift in temperature compared to the lower garden, the feeling of being closer to the sky, all these elements could create a heightened sense of awareness and intimacy. A hand might linger a little longer on an arm, a gaze might hold a moment longer under the wide open sky. The changing light of the day, from the soft glow of dawn to the dramatic hues of sunset, could transform the mount into a space of ever-shifting moods, each conducive to a different kind of secret moment. Furthermore, the plants on the slopes of the mount, beyond providing visual screening, also added to the sensory experience. Hardy shrubs like juniper or yew, grown for their dense evergreen foliage, created a year-round barrier. In spring, flowering shrubs like hawthorn or elderflower would add bursts of color and scent, their blossoms attracting bees and butterflies, further enhancing the natural, secluded atmosphere. The rustle of these in the wind, a gentle whisper against the stone, could become the only sound accompanying a clandestine conversation. A natural symphony protecting spoken words. The rough texture of tree bark, the cool feel of damp earth, the springy resistance of moss underfoot, all these tactile sensations contributed to the immersive experience of the Mount Garden. Medieval horticultural texts, like those of Albertus Magnus, detail various plants and their uses, including those suitable for garden construction and screening. The Mount Garden, therefore, was far more than a mere landscape feature. It was a constructed stage designed to provide both spectacle and sanctuary. Its height offered a unique vantage point, while its strategic planting and winding paths offered a layered defense against prying eyes. For those seeking a moment of quiet intimacy, a shared secret away from the bustling court or household, the mount provided an ideal, elevated escape. It was a place where hearts could soar as high as the landscape, and where forbidden affections found a temporary yet profound haven. The enduring presence of such features in historical garden plans suggests their value extended beyond mere aesthetics, hinting at their role in the social and emotional lives of the medieval nobility. Number 3. The formal knot garden. The formal knot garden, a highly structured and meticulously arranged space, might seem an unlikely candidate for secret romances. At first glance, its very nature, with its geometric patterns and low-lying plants, appears to defy the very idea of concealment. However, the precise design and inherent qualities of these gardens, particularly those on a grand scale, held a surprising potential for discreet interactions, relying on subtlety and the psychology of proximity. These gardens were a testament to human control over nature, a microcosm of order within the larger estate. Knot gardens were characterized by their intricate interlacing patterns, typically formed from low-growing evergreen shrubs like boxwood, hyssop, or thyme. These plants were carefully clipped and maintained to form a dense green lacework, with the spaces between the knots often filled with colored gravel, sand, or fragrant herbs. Patterns could be simple or incredibly complex, forming heraldic devices, abstract designs, or even stylized letters. The very act of walking through a large knot garden required careful navigation, following designated paths that wound between the precise forms. This forced linearity of movement paradoxically could create pockets of momentary privacy. As two individuals moved along a path surrounded by low, fragrant hedges, their proximity would feel intimate even if they were technically visible to a wider audience. The distinct scent of boxwood, earthy and unique, mingled with the aroma of lavender or chamomile, forming a fragrant cloud around the walkers. Historical garden plans, such as those from the French royal courts, often depicted elaborate knot gardens as integral parts of the grand design. The low height of the hedges in a knot garden meant that, while one could not fully disappear, one could easily be partially obscured or blend into the background. From a distance, individual figures might appear as part of the overall pattern, making it difficult to discern specific interactions. Quick touch of hands, a shared smile, a whispered word could all pass, almost imperceptibly, as two people navigated the winding paths. The very formality of the setting could also act as a kind of camouflage. In a highly ordered environment, deviations from expected behavior would be more noticeable, but subtle gestures could be easily dismissed as accidental or part of a polite exchange. The rustle of a silken gown against the crisp leaves of boxwood or the soft scuff of a boot on gravel would be the only sounds accompanying such a brief, intimate moment. Furthermore, many formal knot gardens incorporated larger, more substantial features that offered greater seclusion. While the knots themselves were low, the overall design often included taller elements, such as small decorative trees positioned at the corners or center of a pattern. These trees, perhaps standard roses or small topiary specimens, could provide a fleeting moment of visual obstruction as one passed behind them. More importantly, the edges of the knot garden were often bordered by taller hedges, stone walls, or even the castle itself. These boundaries created a sense of enclosure, and walking close to them could provide a greater degree of privacy, especially if there was a bench or a small alcove built into the wall. A section of the wall, perhaps adorned with climbing ivy or espaliered fruit trees, could become a discreet meeting point, a place where one could lean casually, seemingly admiring the stonework, while engaging in a private conversation. Chronicles from the time of Eleanor of Aquitaine suggest the presence of such formal gardens as backdrops for courtly life. The strategic placement of benches or stone seats within the knot garden also played a role. These resting spots, often placed at the intersection of paths or facing a particularly striking part of the pattern, invited lingering. A shared moment on a bench, seemingly innocent, could be an opportunity for a prolonged exchange of gazes, a gentle touch of knees, or a quiet sharing of a secret. The public nature of the bench could ironically make the moment feel safer, as it was less likely to draw suspicion than a truly hidden location. Cool, smooth stone of the bench could be a silent witness to burgeoning feelings. The use of scent in knot gardens was also significant. The chosen plants were often aromatic: lavender, thyme, chamomile, rosemary, and hyssop. As one brushed past these plants, their essential oils would be released, creating a fragrant cloud. This strong natural perfume could not only enhance the sensory experience, but also mask the subtle human sense of proximity and emotion. The very air around a knot garden was often imbued with a complex tapestry of herbal aromas, a natural buffer for quiet intimacy. The buzzing of bees drawn to the flowering herbs added to the natural background noise, further muffling any hushed tones. Medieval herbals and treatises like the Liber Ruralium Commodorum by Petrus de Crescentius describe the cultivation and uses of such aromatic plants in gardens. Moreover, the sheer visual complexity of a large knot garden could be disorienting, paradoxically creating a sense of being both seen and unseen. The eye drawn to the intricate patterns and the overall design, might overlook the subtle interactions happening within the labyrinthine pathways. It was a place where one could blend into the artistry of the landscape, becoming part of the living artwork. Carefully planned meeting could take advantage of specific times of day or conditions such as twilight or a light mist, when visibility was naturally reduced and the boundaries between forms softened, making discretion easier. The shifting shadows cast by the sun, particularly in the late afternoon, could also create fleeting moments of deeper concealment. The very concept of courtly love which flourished in the medieval period often involved highly stylized and symbolic interactions, frequently taking place in structured garden settings. The knot garden, with its emphasis on order and symbolic patterns, provided a perfect stage for these nuanced exchanges. A hidden message might be conveyed, not through words, but through the precise placement of a flower or a specific gesture performed as one navigated the intricate pathways. The formality of the setting encouraged a certain theatricality, where emotions were often expressed through subtle codes, perfectly suited to the subtle concealment offered by the garden's design. The delicate lace-like patterns of the hedges could mirror the delicate intricacies of a secret affection. In essence, the formal knot garden, despite its openness, offered a unique environment for secret romances through its precise design, sensory elements, and the psychology of its space. It was a place where discretion was woven into the very fabric of the landscape, where moments of intimacy could unfold within the intricate beauty of a living puzzle. The low hedges, the winding paths, the fragrant air, and the overall structured beauty combined to create a setting where secret whispers could pass unnoticed, protected by the very formality that seemed to expose them. These gardens, a testament to human ingenuity and artistic expression, held more secrets than their open nature might initially suggest. Number 4. The serene cloister garden. Cloister garden, or hortus conclusus, a quintessential feature of medieval monasteries and convents, presented a paradox, a space of profound spiritual contemplation that, by its very nature, could also become a discreet setting for clandestine human interaction. Enclosed by the arcades of the cloister walk, these gardens were walled off from the outside world, forming a sanctuary within a sanctuary. This intense seclusion, while intended for spiritual devotion, also made it an ideal, if dangerous, location for the hushed exchange of forbidden sentiments. The very stones of the cloister seemed to absorb and hold secrets. The defining characteristic of the cloister garden was its absolute enclosure. High walls formed by the surrounding monastic buildings ensured complete visual privacy from external eyes. This inward-facing design created a contained microcosm, a world unto itself, for those within the cloister, whether monks, nuns, or select visitors. This enclosure meant that any interactions taking place in the garden were highly localized and difficult for outsiders to observe. The only entry points were typically through the cloister walk itself, providing a measure of controlled access. The sense of being utterly cut off from the world beyond the walls fostered an atmosphere of deep introspection, but also a feeling of safety for those seeking illicit moments. The sound of distant church bells, or the chanting from the chapel, would be the only sounds reaching this tranquil space from outside. Records from various medieval monastic orders, like the Cistercians or Benedictines, detail the strict enclosure of their cloisters. Typically, the cloister garden featured a simple cruciform layout, with paths dividing the space into 4 neat quadrants. At the center, a well, a fountain, or a single tree served as a focal point. The paths, often made of packed earth or gravel, were narrow, forcing proximity between those walking them. A seemingly accidental brush of hands as 2 people passed each other, a shared glance over the rim of a water pitcher at the central well could be charged with unspoken meaning. The quietude of the cloister, typically broken only by the gentle sounds of nature, the chirping of birds, the rustle of leaves, the soft trickle of water, amplified any human sound, making hushed tones an absolute necessity for privacy. The scent of damp earth, mingled with the fragrance of specific herbs or flowers, created a unique, pervasive atmosphere, Plants cultivated in a cloister garden were often symbolic and practical. Roses, lilies, and violets were common, representing purity or the Virgin Mary, but their beauty and fragrance also added to the sensory appeal. More importantly, medicinal herbs were frequently grown for the monastic infirmary. These herb beds, with their various heights and densities, offered natural screens. A monk or nun tending to a patch of healing herbs, perhaps gathering chamomile or calendula, could easily engage in a brief, low-voiced conversation with another person, seemingly also absorbed in horticultural tasks. The very act of bending over the plants would make one's presence less noticeable to anyone observing from the cloister walk. The Hortulus, by Walafrid Strabo, a 9th century poem, describes a monastic garden filled with herbs for both practical and symbolic use, highlighting the duality of these. The arcades of the cloister walk surrounding the garden provided a sheltered passage and a vantage point. However, the columns and arches of the arcade also created visual breaks and shadows, making it difficult to maintain continuous observation of the entire garden from any single point. A couple walking discreetly in the garden, perhaps on opposite sides of the central well, could exchange glances across the space, or arrange to meet briefly behind a thick rosebush. The play of light and shadow filtering through the arches and onto the garden floor created shifting patterns that could aid in concealment, making it difficult to discern precise movements or expressions. Cool stone of the arcade walls, often worn smooth by centuries of passing feet, seemed to hum with the echoes of countless whispered prayers and perhaps secret desires. The strict routines and regulated lives within the monastery or convent also surprisingly created opportunities for secret meetings. Knowing the schedule of prayers, meals, and work, individuals could pinpoint specific times when the garden might be less frequented or when a particular part of it would be empty. A seemingly innocent task, such as fetching water from the well or gathering flowers for the altar, could provide the perfect pretext for a brief unsupervised moment in the garden. The very sanctity of the space could act as a psychological shield, making it seem improbable that such a forbidden interaction would occur there, thus diverting suspicion. Quiet devotion of the place seemed to absorb any impropriety. For specific medieval literary examples, while not always explicitly about romantic love within the cloister, the theme of forbidden affection and hidden encounters is present in broader medieval narratives. Stories of runaway nuns or monks, or tales of secular figures falling in love with those in religious orders sometimes feature brief, poignant meetings in such enclosed spaces. The dramatic tension of such an encounter in a sacred place, a place of renunciation, would heighten the emotional impact. The scent of incense from the chapel, mingling with the earthly scent of growing plants, could create a disorienting blend of the sacred and the profane. Presence of a central well or fountain also provided a focal point for interaction. Drawing water was a common and necessary task, offering a plausible reason for lingering. The gurgling sound of the water being drawn or the splash of a fountain would offer continuous acoustic cover for hushed words. A moment shared while leaning over the well, their reflections merging in the dark water, could be profoundly intimate, a fleeting connection witnessed only by the silent stones. Cool, refreshing taste of the water could symbolize a shared moment of relief or clandestine pleasure. Ultimately, the cloister garden's profound sense of enclosure, its deliberate separation from the outside world, and its inherent quietude made it a surprisingly effective, if daring, backdrop for secret romances. The religious devotion of the place intended to foster spiritual love, ironically, became a cloak for earthly affections. The very structure that facilitated contemplation and prayer also offered discreet corners and opportune moments for a different kind of human connection, one that defied the strictures of monastic life. The cloister garden, serene and symbolic, silently held within its walls the echoes of countless spiritual devotions, and perhaps a few forbidden hearts. Number 5. The wild edges of the orchard garden. The orchard garden of the medieval period. A functional, yet often beautiful space, offered a more natural and less formal setting for secret romances than the manicured knot gardens or the enclosed cloisters. While typically a working area for growing fruit, its less controlled edges and the very nature of scattered trees provided a unique blend of open space and intimate concealment. Unlike the strictly designed pleasure gardens, the orchard invited a sense of relaxed wandering, perfect for seemingly accidental encounters that were anything but the sweet scent of ripening fruit or the delicate perfume of blossoms would fill the air, creating an atmosphere of lush abundance. Primary feature of an orchard garden was, of course, the fruit trees: apple, pear, cherry, plum, and sometimes quince or medlar. These trees were often planted in somewhat regular rows, creating long avenues that could be walked, but their natural growth provided significant visual breaks. A cluster of apple trees in full blossom or heavy with fruit could create a dense canopy of leaves and branches, effectively obscuring anyone standing within their embrace from distant views. The soft, dappled light filtering through the leaves created an ethereal atmosphere, inviting, lingering. The rustle of leaves in a gentle breeze would provide a natural sound curtain muffling hushed conversations. Records from manor houses and estates across medieval Europe consistently mention orchards as essential parts of their grounds, providing both sustenance and beauty. The key to the orchard's romantic potential lay in its wild edges. While the main body of the orchard might be relatively open, the areas where the cultivated trees met the more untamed parts of the estate, a hedgerow, a small wood, a stream, or a boundary wall, offered prime locations for clandestine meetings. Here, the neatly planted rows gave way to more random growth, taller shrubs, brambles, or wild roses forming a thicker, more impenetrable barrier. This liminal space, neither fully cultivated nor entirely wild, provided perfect cover. A person could claim to be gathering wild berries or inspecting the boundary, their true purpose hidden by the dense undergrowth. Prickles of brambles, though a minor discomfort, added a layer of natural security to the hidden alcoves they formed. Furthermore, individual trees within the orchard, especially older, larger specimens, possessed a unique capacity for concealment. A gnarled oak or sprawling apple tree with low-hanging branches could provide an entire secluded room beneath its canopy. The thick trunk could shield two figures from view, and the branches laden with leaves could create a leafy ceiling. Quick, illicit embrace or a shared moment of silence could occur beneath such a tree, the fruit hanging above like silent witnesses. The scent of earth and bark, combined with the aroma of fruit, would be a grounding natural perfume for such encounters. The Roman de la Rose, while focusing on a symbolic garden, describes elements of natural wildness that often bordered cultivated areas, reflecting the common medieval landscape. The ground cover in an orchard was often less manicured than in a formal garden. Long grasses, wild flowers, and fallen leaves could create a softer, more yielding surface, inviting one to sit or recline. A shared picnic, seemingly innocent, could provide an extended opportunity for conversation and closeness, away from watchful eyes. Quiet hum of insects in the tall grass, the buzzing of bees around fallen fruit, and the distant calls of birds would provide a gentle background symphony masking private words. The textures of the natural environment, the cool grass, the rough bark, the smooth skin of a ripened apple, engaged the senses, deepening the feeling of intimacy. The seasonal cycles of the orchard also contributed to its appeal. In spring, the explosion of blossoms, white and pink, created a breathtakingly beautiful and ephemeral setting. The air would be thick with the sweet, delicate scent of apple or cherry blossoms, a sensory veil for budding affections. The falling petals, like soft snow, could cover footprints, leaving no trace of a secret meeting. In summer, the shade provided by the full canopy of leaves would be a welcome respite from the heat, inviting one to linger in its cool embrace. The ripening fruit provided a natural excuse for frequent visits, and the simple act of sharing a freshly picked apple could be a moment of profound, unspoken connection. In autumn, the rich colors of the changing leaves and the abundant harvest would provide a dramatic backdrop. The scent of fallen fruit and decaying leaves adding a bittersweet note to any clandestine farewell or promise of future meetings. The Tacinum sanitatis often depicts scenes of harvesting, proving the beauty and bounty of medieval orchards. The relative isolation of many orchards, often situated away from the main castle or manor house, also enhanced their suitability for secret encounters. While not as strictly walled as a cloister garden, their distance meant that casual visitors were less likely to wander into them without specific purpose. This required a deliberate journey which could be planned and executed with discretion. A path leading to the orchard, perhaps winding through fields or along a stream, could provide additional moments of privacy before reaching the destination itself. The sound of water from a nearby stream or the rustle of reeds would further contribute to the masking of sounds. Furthermore, the varied purpose of an orchard as a place of sustenance allowed for plausible excuses for visiting. A servant might be sent to gather fruit for the kitchen, providing an opportunity to meet a secret admirer. A noble might claim to be inspecting the harvest, allowing for a clandestine conversation with a forbidden love. The practical nature of the orchard could ironically cloak the emotional intensity of the interactions taking place within its leafy confines. The simplicity of the setting, devoid of the overt grandeur of a pleasure garden, could also foster a sense of natural, unadorned intimacy. In essence, the orchard garden, particularly its wilder edges and the protective canopy of its trees, offered a natural, less formal, but equally compelling setting for secret romances. Its inherent beauty, the sensory richness of its seasons, and its often isolated location combined to create a space where hidden affections could blossom and ripen much like the fruit it bore. It was a place where nature itself conspired to guard secrets, providing both beauty and effective concealment for those seeking a moment of forbidden connection. The enduring presence of orchards in medieval life and literature speaks to their multifaceted role, not least as silent witnesses to countless hushed encounters.